Well, in a stunning twist, the company with the unofficial motto, "Don't be evil," is turning out to be very sinister. Of course, the motto should have been a tip-off. A few weeks ago, Google fired engineer James Damore simply for writing a reasoned and pretty moderate critique of the company's diversity policies on what was supposed to be an open forum. But even employees of other companies aren't safe, it turns out. For example, until recently, Barry Lynn worked at the New America Foundation. It's a nonpartisan think tank. His work involved promoting open markets and combating monopolies. And as part of that work, he praised an antitrust fine levied against Google recently in Europe. Well, that greatly displeased Google, which turned out to be one of his think tank funders. Google founder Eric Schmidt called the foundation head, Anne-Marie Slaughter, to express his displeasure, and just a short time later, Lynn was fired. Well, it's not hard to imagine a similar situation happening at almost any other organization here in Washington, because Google funds hundreds of nonprofits and think tanks. On the right, they donate to the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, Americans for Tax Reform. On the left, they give to the Human Rights Campaign, the NAACP, the Clinton Foundation. They've donated to libertarians at Cato and the Mercatus Center, and ironically enough, they've given money to the American Antitrust Institute, which is hilarious. In Washington, Google spent more than $15 million last year lobbying. That puts it third among all corporate lobbyists. This year, they're on track to be #1. And even where they don't have money, they have power. Google, of course, has monopolistic power over web searches, online video, and online advertising. They're the biggest player in email, internet browsers, and smartphone operating systems. If you've got an Android phone, Google is able to track everywhere you go. Not that they would, because they're not evil, remember? They're a company with massive power, more power than any company in history has ever had. They can invade your privacy whenever they want to. Maybe it's time to consider putting Google in check. Matt Stoller is a fellow at Open Markets, and he joins us tonight. Matt, I was amazed to see how many different think tanks and nonprofits Google funds in Washington. And it answered a question that I've had for years, which is, why does nobody ever criticize the concentration of all this power at a single company? Maybe because it's their paying.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it really shows how the system that Americans are upset about is rigged. This kind of shadowy, swamp-like D.C. institutional framework,
yes,
which is funded by big business monopolies to acquire political power. And that's what people have to realize. Monopolies are a problem of politics. They are not a business. They are not commerce. They are the control of Americans through monopolistic and anti-competitive tactics.
So most people look at Google, I think, and say, boy, they provide a great service. You know, their email's fantastic, and it is. I use it. Their search is the best. Why should they be worried about Google's power?
Yeah, I mean, Google has 7 products with more than 1 billion users, and they're great products. YouTube is great. Gmail is great. It is a technological marvel. The problem isn't the products that they produce. The problem is the data gathering and the anti-competitive tactics that they use to acquire that power and to sort of steal revenue from every publisher, every producer of information in art and news in our culture. And that is a threat to democracy. So the idea with traditional antitrust policy, which is designed to slow down the capture of monopoly and restore citizenship, is to maintain what's good about these institutions, but protect citizens from their overwhelming power.
I mean, one of the most basic precepts of government is no government allows institutions to accrue enough power to challenge its authority, and yet our government has allowed Google to accumulate this power and said basically nothing. Why is that?
Well, in a lot of ways, it was sort of an intellectual takeover on the right and on the left, in which we stopped understanding that corporations and banks were actually part of our political system. So in the middle yes, of the century, and actually going back to the founding of the country, there was this understanding that commerce and business needed to be separated from government, and that if commercial institutions became too powerful, they were in effect government-like entities. So you can look at Google as a kind of concentration of power that is political in nature, not just a commercial or business entity. We sort of lost that tradition in the 70s, and first the financial crisis with too big to fail banks, and now the growth of these dominant internet platforms that are manipulating Americans has really brought that tradition back.
I'm sorry, this is, I just want to tell our viewers, this is a list of all the groups in Washington, the nonprofits that receive money from Google, and if you're wondering why nobody ever criticizes Google, this may have something to do with it. I'm a little amazed, finally, by the response of liberals, well, and of conservatives, but conservatives traditionally have supported big businesses, okay? But liberals traditionally have been very suspicious of corporate power. Along comes Google, amasses more power than anyone ever, way more than Rockefeller or Carnegie ever had. And liberals in my neighborhood never say anything about it. Why is that?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, because there's actually a strong both conservative and liberal tradition of anti-monopoly thinking.
Yes.
There's also a strong pro-monopoly tradition on both the right and the left, and that's the tradition that's been dominant in both parties. So there are a lot of liberals, and I probably was one of them 10 years ago, who thought that Google's motto of "Don't do evil" was the right thing. You know, they meant it, and their idea of organizing the world's information sounded neat, because, you know, organizing information, who could dislike that? But once you start to see this overwhelming organization of all information, a lot of things start to change.
Well, it's terrifying, and I appreciate your being one of the rare people here who's working on this. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Thank you.